What's up, people? Welcome back to Secrets of the Bible. Today we will be taking a look at Exodus, the second book of the Bible, and some claim the most influential book ever composed. The original Hebrew name for the book is Shemot, translated as Names, while the more common Greek title translates as Exit. Like Genesis, the authorship of Exodus is traditionally assigned to Moses, which would date the book to around 1450 BC, while modern scholars claim that there are two unknown authors responsible and that composition took place in the 6th and 5th centuries BC. Exodus consists of 40 chapters which recount the story of the relationship between God, Moses, and the Hebrew people. And that story continues on into the following 3 books, is 2/3 the size of the New Testament, and accounts for roughly 1/7 of the entire Bible. So, starting off with number 10, Battle of the Gods. Prior to the actual escape of the Hebrew people from Egypt, one of the major themes of Exodus is the ineptitude of Pharaoh. From the very first chapter, not only does his command of infanticide for newborn Hebrew males go unenforced, when he reissues the command, he fails to limit the decree to Hebrews, but that doesn't really matter because the second decree is ignored as well, most notably by his own daughter. Pharaoh employs inept magicians, and despite being repeatedly dominated by the 10 plagues, only grows increasingly obstinate. Pharaoh's defiance culminates in the destruction of his chariot and cavalry divisions by the closing of the Red Sea, and some Bible scholars speculate that Pharaoh himself died in that fracas, but the more common perspective is that he stayed behind with the infantry. And this is all important because Pharaoh himself was the physical representation of the Egyptian gods and worshipped as a god to varying extents throughout the Egyptian Empire. And the Hebrew god trounces Pharaoh throughout Exodus, demonstrating that the gods of Egypt are unfit to be called such, and pointing to the greater overall theme of Exodus, the sovereignty of the Hebrew God. Number 9. Distant Relations. While Exodus makes no mention of the fact, there are a couple potentially surprising relations between the people mentioned, most notably between the Hebrews and the Egyptians. As mentioned in Psalms 105:23, the Egyptians were said to be descendants of Ham, separating them from the Hebrews by some 20 generations. Moses initially serves to bridge the gap between those cultures, but as an adult, Moses casts off the Egyptian culture and embraces his Hebrew roots, and he does that in part by taking up shepherding, an occupation detested by the Egyptians as mentioned in Genesis 46:34. Now the tribe that Moses is shepherding for and ends up marrying into were known as the Midianites, and it being of particular importance that the Hebrew bloodline not be mingled with other cultures, the legitimacy of Moses' marriage may come into question, but fortunately the Midianites were in fact descendants of Abraham, as mentioned in Genesis 25:2-6. And while idolatry had spread among the neighboring tribes, the Midianites still worshipped the Hebrew God, and that retention is made evident through the name of Moses' father-in-law, the priest Reuel, whose name translates as Friend of God. Number 8. The God Rod. One day, while Moses was out performing his shepherding duties, he happened upon the famous burning bush, widely believed to be humanity's first communication from God in over 400 years. In their discussion, Moses learns that God intends to use his staff as a tool for miracles. And there's some confusion over the exact reason for Moses carrying a staff, but given that Moses is thought to be around 80 years of age here, it may have simply been a walking stick, but others see it as a shepherd's crook for herding livestock. As instructed, Moses casts his staff to the ground and it transforms into a serpent, bringing Moses to flee in terror. Now the word used for serpent here is generic and we have no indication of a definite species, but Bible scholars have made some interesting speculations, and the first of those being that the serpent is representative of the Garden of Eden serpent, possibly implying that Pharaoh's power is provided by none other than Satan. The second interpretation is that the staff transforms into a cobra, with the cobra being the major religious significance to the Egyptians and representative of the goddess Wadjet. Now, over time, myths of the staff's transformation would run wild and come to include fiery snakes and, I kid you not, giant dragons. But perhaps more interesting is the translation found in the encounter with Pharaoh in Exodus 7:10. The word for serpent used in that verse is not the same as the one used at the burning bush, instead referring to any reptilian water monster, and, once again for its religious significance to the Egyptians, is widely interpreted to be a crocodile. Number 7. Killing Moses. Exodus 4:24. And it came to pass by the way in the inn that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Now, the first issue here comes up with the translation of the word inn. As it turns out, it's unanimously agreed that this isn't referring to a hotel of any sort, but rather merely a roadside rest area. Where scholars are in lesser agreement is precisely what happened when God met Moses and sought to kill him. While a few claim this is referring to God appearing in physical form, sword in hand, the far more common interpretation is that this is referring to some acute physical ailment, possibly a stroke or particularly fast-acting virus. And the support offered for that conclusion comes from the following sequence of events. Moses' wife, Zipporah, averts disaster when she picks up a sharp rock and performs circumcision on their son. Now, responsibility for that procedure would have traditionally fallen to Moses, so it may indicate that he was physically incapable of doing so. Further, considering that Zipporah and Moses had 2 sons and she only performs one circumcision, it's widely thought that their older son had already been circumcised, and that God sought to kill Moses because Moses hadn't performed the traditional circumcision on the 8th day following his son's birth. And why wouldn't Moses have performed that circumcision? Well, as mentioned, Zipporah was a Midianite, and they may not have circumcised their males until 13 years of age. The story ends with Zipporah calling Moses a bridegroom of blood, and there's little consensus on whether this is a rebuke or a term of endearment. Moses is then thought to have sent his wife and sons home, as we do not hear of them again until Exodus 18:2. Number 6. It's not a trick. Over the course of Moses and Aaron's first few encounters with Pharaoh, they demonstrate the power of the Hebrew God, transforming Moses' staff and initiating Egypt's series of plagues. In retort, Pharaoh's court magicians, named Jannes and Jambres, as according to 2 Timothy 3:8, offer weak emulations of the feats they see performed, often merely contributing to their problems. Now, while the verse says that the magicians used secret arts, a couple more literal translations may offer a peek behind the curtain. The first of those being that the word used for magicians may be more accurately translated as writers of charms, possibly meaning that these men were glorified scribes. The second translation centers on the word enchantments, which is possibly better translated as sleight of hand. Number 5. The plagues. So, of the 10 plagues visited on Egypt, there are several alternate translations that may offer a more accurate depiction of events. Now, the first plague, where all the Nile's water was transmuted to blood, was in fact significantly more devastating than it may initially appear. The Nile wasn't just a source of drinking water, it was a major source of food. But those fish weren't just food, as some of them held religious significance, and allowing them to be harmed was a sin. Further, the Nile was guarded and controlled by Egyptian gods, and its quality and flow were indicative of the Pharaoh's relationship with those gods. So, when Moses and Aaron destroyed the Nile, it's commonly believed that a major festival was taking place on the riverbank, so potentially thousands of people could personally witness just how powerless their Pharaoh really was. Moving on to the plague of gnats in Exodus 8:16, many claim that gnats is more accurately translated as lice, with other scholars equally vocal that those verses indicate mosquitoes. Then, skipping ahead a few disasters, we arrive at the plague of hail that is often depicted as being on fire, as 9:23 states that fire ran along upon the ground, more accurately translated as fire walked earthward. And some scholars understand that to instead indicate the phenomenon of ball lightning, supported by Ezekiel 1:4, where a similar expression is used, but in that case is nearly unanimously understood to mean lightning. And overall, it's unclear exactly how the Hebrews were affected by these plagues, and this is part of the evidence that some scholars use to show that there are multiple authors, as the Hebrews are alternately depicted as living amidst the Egyptians, while elsewhere they live separately. Number 4. The final plague. While the final plague, the death of the firstborn, is probably the most well-known, there are a few features that can be easily overlooked. To begin with, while the text simply states firstborn, the Hebrew word translated here refers specifically to males, and there are 2 reasons for that. First off, the law of primogeniture was practiced in Egypt and much of the surrounding area as well, and that law secured the greatest rights of inheritance to the eldest male son in a family. With that major component of the family unit suddenly vanished nationwide, the cultural upheaval was likely to produce immense social disruption lasting multiple years. Second, this verse is thought to mirror the opening verses of Exodus, where some 80 years prior the Pharaoh had been unsuccessful in killing the Hebrew male infants, where the Hebrew God is completely successful in carrying out the parallel act. And one important point here is that the timing of the final plague's appearance is thought to be quite purposefully left unstated, and many scholars suspect that having been done to increase the suspense and terror experienced by the Egyptians. Finally, verse 11:5 explains that the firstborn animals were to be included in the plague, and the logic here is commonly thought to be drawn from the fact that not only was animal worship quite common throughout Egypt, but pets were common as well, and including those in the plague would maximize the devastation. Number 3. The exit. When, following the 10th plague, Pharaoh comes to his senses and allows the Hebrews to leave Egypt, Chapter 12, verse 37 mentions that there were 600,000 Hebrew males included in that group, but that only refers to males over 20 years of age, and the total number of Hebrews fleeing Egypt is often estimated at 2 to 2.5 million, but there are some estimates as high as 4 million. As part of the compensation package for 430 years of slavery, God tells the Hebrews to borrow the jewels of the Egyptians, who God promises to make exceptionally compliant in handing over their valuables. There has been some controversy over whether this verse indicates theft, but the word translated as borrow here is more accurately translated as ask, and the word translated as jewels is far more diverse in use and includes just about anything of value. And to give some idea of just how much plunder the Hebrews left Egypt with, chapter 25, verse 39 mentions that the ceremonial tools and accessories necessary for the tabernacle would require a talent of gold, about 96 pounds, and chapter 26, verse 21 mentions that the foundation for the tabernacle would require 40 sockets of silver, each of those sockets weighing about 96 pounds as well, totaling some 3,800 pounds of silver. Number 2. Fast food. After the Hebrew mass exodus, the people were in need of a consistent food source as they wandered the desert, and given that natural food sources were sure to be quickly annihilated by a group of that size, God intervened and provided them with a couple miraculous sources of nourishment. The first of those took shape as immense flocks of quail that visited the Hebrews regularly and were easily caught. There has, however, been some controversy over the interpretation of the word quail, and some scholars have argued that the word should instead be interpreted as locust, and a few scholars have even argued that the word would be better translated as flying fish. The second source of nourishment was the sweet, airy substance known as manna, which is thought to stem from the phrase manu, meaning "what is this?" One of the more common explanations for manna comes from the edible substance produced by the tamarisk tree, and that substance is commonly called air honey, but experts warn against consuming too much as it is a laxative. Should we ever discover the Ark of the Covenant, we'll have a far better idea of what exactly manna is composed of, as chapter 16 verse 32 relates that there is a jar of manna stored in the Ark. Number 1. The Golden Calf. While the story of the golden calf created by Moses' brother Aaron is one of the more widely known features of Exodus, there may be a great deal more taking place in that story than is immediately apparent. To start with, the sequence of events are initiated when the people gathered around Aaron in 32:1, but that phrase is widely thought to be more accurately translated as gathered against Aaron, as in he was facing an uprising. And the source of their unrest is mentioned as the extended absence of Moses, but given the circumstances, there may have also been some rumors spreading around the encampment. As mentioned in Deuteronomy 9:9, Moses spent his 40 days and nights on the mountain without any food or water, and considering that several people saw him leave without any provisions, the people may have just assumed he was dead. So, with their representative of God being at the very least missing, the people settle on the need for an idol, and they say to Aaron, "Make us gods." Except the word used for gods here can be translated as either plural or singular, and considering Nehemiah 9:18 and the fact that Aaron only makes one idol, there's a good chance that it should be translated in the singular. And that difference may change the story immensely, but we will get to that in a moment. Aaron then asks them to give up their earrings in 32:2, so he'll have material to make the calf, but what the text doesn't mention is that this is nearly unanimously considered to be a ploy by Aaron to convince the people to give up their demands for an idol, assuming that their decorations will be of greater value to them. Aaron creates the golden calf and tells the people that these are your gods who brought you up out of Egypt, which can also be translated as this is your God who brought you up out of Egypt, which may in fact indicate that in making the golden calf, Aaron was creating a physical representation of the Hebrew God, which would make sense of why Aaron immediately declares a festival to the Hebrew God the following day. During that festival, the people rose up to play, which is commonly interpreted as a euphemism for debauchery. God then tells Moses of the shenanigans taking place in the encampment and that he intends to kill them all off in order to have Moses take Abraham's place as the father of a new nation, which would make for quite a different story, but Moses convinces God that he can take care of the ordeal and saves the people instead. And that wraps it up for the secrets of Exodus. There are, however, a few bonus facts. Bonus fact number 1. The 3rd, 6th, and 9th plagues are not preceded by warnings like the other ones are. Bonus fact number 2. When God says, "Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day" in Exodus 16:29, we have records of people who took that verse to heart and remained completely physically stationary the entire day every Sabbath. Bonus fact number 3. In Exodus 17:11, when the Hebrews battle the Amalekites were descendants of Esau, and it's thought that they still had beef over Esau's stolen birthright. Bonus fact number 4. When God says, "I bear you on eagle's wings" in Exodus 19:4, eagle's wings is thought to be better translated as the griffin vulture, as those are native to the area and can have over 9 feet of wingspan. And finally, repentance. When I claimed in the last video that Genesis was the only book where God repents, I was mistaken. God repents again in Exodus 32:14. And, as an aside, I will occasionally make mistakes in these videos, but I will always correct them when I find them. Once again, so much thanks for watching. Catch you soon in the Secrets of Leviticus.